Hey everyone, Robot here. In this video we'll go over all you need to know to play the Forgotten Ruins map effectively and efficiently as Survivor. We'll cover how to find your way around the map, the strongest tiles to loop, where to find portals to teleport, which is a new mechanic introduced with this map, and which gens spawn on the same spot every time. Let's get started. The Forgotten Ruins map is both an outdoor and indoor, or should I say underground, map. It consists of a surface level and a dungeon. The surface is pretty straightforward to understand, but the dungeon can be a bit overwhelming at first. But fear not, as I have created a map layout that will help you find your way around the map, both on the surface and the dungeon. By the way, I have created timestamps that will cover the main topics for this video, so if you're interested on something specific, you can skip to that part if you'd like. Now first, let's cover how to find your way around the map. Let's look at the map layout, starting with the easy part, which is the surface. Looking at the map from above, we have the top side, which is where the entrance to the dungeon is, and we'll call this main building. Sometimes basement can spawn next to the main building. Then we have the mid portion of the map, and lastly the bottom of the map includes the two exit gates and the killer shack, which is the other location where basement can spawn. I want to point out that Killer Shack, the entrance to the dungeon, and the exit gates always spawn on the same spot in every map variation. To divide the map even further, to make it easier to navigate, I came up with clock callouts. The tiles that spawn on the rest of the map, on the surface at least, are common tiles you'd find in a map like Shattered Squared, which is the same realm as the Forgotten Ruins, and that is the Decimated Borgo. The other landmarks that are consistent on every map variation are the portal entrances and exits. Since there are 3 of each total around the map, including surface and dungeon, I assigned a number to each and identify them as PE for portal entrance and PX for portal exit. The surface has 1 portal entrance and 2 portal exits. We'll talk more about the portal mechanic a little later, including the specific location of the map where you teleport when you enter each of the different portals. Now let's cover the dungeon. The tiles that spawn here are consistent, meaning you will always see the same tiles in every map variation. As with the surface, I created a layout for the dungeon and assigned names and clock callouts to each area. I also left the shape of the map surface on top of it to give you an idea of where things in the dungeon are in relation to the surface. This took me a while to figure out with the help from my friends Tacos and Demari, so please let me know if this is helpful so I can do the same for any future maps that have the same level of complexity as this one. With the layout out of the way, let me walk you through the dungeon to identify each area and at the same time see which areas are strong to loop and which ones are weak. Let's start with the cages room, or a 2, using clock callouts. You'll find this area by making a left at the bottom of the stairs when you enter the dungeon. Here you find a gat window which, fun fact, doesn't seem to make survivors stagger, meaning you won't have a cooldown to continue running when you land after taking the window. I'm not sure if this will be patched later, but just wanted to point it out. The killer can do one of 2 things once you take this window. They can follow you through the window or walk down the hallway to the doorway into the room. If the killer takes the window, you can abuse it by leaving the room and going up the stairs towards mid. Keep your check spot at the top of the stairs, then take the window again if the killer commits. You can do this as long as the killer will let you and until the entity closes the window. Now, if after taking the window, the killer decides to go down the stairs into the cages room, you can play around the platform for a bit to waste a bit of time. And if you have to, drop the gat pallet on the platform, not the pallet on the ground since that one is very unsafe. The reason the pallet on the platform is a gat pallet is because once dropped, if the killer doesn't break it, they need to drop and go around the cages to get to the other side of the pallet, which would allow you to vault the pallet back and forth. If the killer decides to break it from the doorway side, which would be the smart thing to do, while the killer is busy breaking it, you can drop to the ground and go up the stairs on the window side. There's a small step that doesn't allow the killer, or you as survivor for that matter, to get to the platform right next to the window. This means the killer would have to drop and go up the stairs, or at least pretend like they go up the stairs to try to force you to go down the step. Once that happens, you'd have to commit to get out of the room since you wouldn't be able to go back up the step, and the killer can then easily come up the stairs and hit you. I don't suggest you drop to the ground at this point because the stagger from the drop would work against you and the killer could double tap you, meaning he could get 2 easy and fast hits on you. Of course, if you have no other choice, you still have the pallet next to the cages, so if you need to, try to play for the stun. Remember, the best outcome is not necessarily to make the killer stop chasing you, but waste as much time as you can so your teammates can work on objectives. One thing I'd like to mention is there's only one way out of this room, and once you're inside, killers like Trapper or Knight could trap you in here with a trap or guard respectively, so just keep that in mind. But there's another strong loop in the dungeon, and that is mid. So if you're forced to leave the cages room, or 2 by callouts, you can try to make your way into mid, where you have a room with a pallet and window and excellent check spots. Once you're in this room, if you stand by the lockers, you have good visibility on the killer, and you can even keep an eye on them by looking between the lockers. If the killer gives you the window, you can go around the long wall and get back into the room. Keep your check spots and try to take advantage of the area as much as you can without having to drop the pallet, unless you absolutely have to. This is a good area to waste as much time as you can, and if you want to, you can even connect this tile with 2 or the cages room. Between these 2 tiles, I think you can waste a lot of the killer's time. So now that we've covered the 2 strongest areas in the dungeon, at least in my opinion, let's look at the rest of the areas which aren't as strong, but let's still take a look to get familiar with them. So next we'll cover 11 using callouts, which is not great, but we do have a pallet and a short structure here. So unless you have to, try to avoid this area unless you have no other choice. Making our way into 10, we have a hallway that leads into what I call Vecna's quarters. I've identified this room with a V on the map layout. Here you have another pallet and window combo, but not as strong as mid. Still playable of course, but not very safe. You do have a window you could take, but once you're there, you're in a hallway and you have to run to a safer tile, which could be mid, but it's a little far. So not super safe, but it's always an option. Next to Vecna's quarters, we have a room with bookshelves, or 6 by callouts. Not a great area to loot by itself, but we do have a filler pallet. Once dropped, if the killer decides to not break it, you could continue to run into Vecna's room and take the window if the killer lets you take it. But if the killer decides to double back or try to mind game you around this tile, keep your check spots and run around the tile as much as you can. You could be zoned out however, so keep this in mind as well. Let's continue down the hallway of Knight Armors, which I've also labeled as bottom mid. This hallway leads us into a decent window. I wouldn't call this a gut window because if you were to take it, the killer has the option to go into the little cave or 5 by callouts to drop there and catch up with you. The way I play this is linking the chase with the pallet that spawns in what I call the torture room or 3 by callouts. Once dropped though, you'd have to run around the tile and play 50-50s, so it's not great, but can help you waste a little bit of time. Other than that, this room doesn't have much else in terms of areas to loop, but we do have a caged monster. I don't know much about Dungeons and Dragons, but I believe this one-eyed monster is called a Beholder. If that's not right, please let me know in the comment section below. So since I think it's called a Beholder, I named that landmark BH on the map layout for Beholder. You could also name it C for cage if you'd like, or M for monster, or you could just not name it at all if you don't want to. But I think it's a pretty cool feature and a good landmark that they've included in the map. And last but not least, in our dungeon tour, we get to 4, which has nothing other than a portal, which is then a great segue into the next part of the video, which is where to find portals to teleport. Starting at 4, we have the first portal entrance, and I've named this PE1, which stands for Portal Entrance 1. If you enter this portal, you'll be teleported to the surface, specifically to the top part of the map, around 10-ish by callouts. The next portal entrance, which I've identified as PE2, is found in Vecna's quarters, and if you enter this portal, it also teleports you to the surface, to the bottom part of it using the map layout, right around 6 by callouts. And the third and final portal entrance is on the surface, on the top side of the main building. If you enter this portal, you'll be teleported to the midsection of the dungeon. Portals can be useful in chase, especially if the killer decides to follow you and you're trying to make the killer leave the dungeon area or surface, if you want them to stay away from gens that haven't been worked on. There's really no cooldown for the teleport, meaning if you enter one, the killer can quickly follow behind you, so use them wisely. The other use for the portals is to save you time going back and forth between surface and dungeon. If you need to go down for an unhook in the dungeon and you're at the surface, or to get back to a gen, you have the option of the portals to save some time. And the last thing I'll mention is gens. You have a guaranteed gen in Vecna's quarters and in the torture room, or 3 by callouts. You can also find a gen on the hallway to your right when you enter into the dungeon at the bottom of the stairs. The rest of the gens are located on the surface and their spawn locations can vary. If you have other ways you run tiles in this map or other tips and tricks, please share them in the comment section below. I hope this was useful, and if you'd like to be notified when I upload my next video, you can subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to watch other videos with tips or gameplay, or other maps I've created guides for, you can click on the thumbnails on the left hand side of your screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.